When the Spanish arrived in the Valley of Mexico, they did not find a poor society. They found cities. Causeways stretched across lakes. Markets filled entire plazas. Storehouses overflowed with grain, textiles, weapons, and tribute goods stacked in careful order. Officials recorded deliveries. Messengers moved constantly. Armies were fed. Priests were clothed. Builders were supplied. This was an empire that worked. And yet, there was something missing. No coins circulated. No banks settled accounts. No universal money measured value. The Aztec Empire was wealthy, but it was wealthy without money. This was not an oversight. It was a system. At its center stood Tenochtitlan, a city built on water and control. From here, the empire coordinated hundreds of subject communities spread across mountains, coasts, and valleys. Each region produced different goods. Each owed different obligations. Wealth did not flow upward as abstract numbers. It arrived as things: maize, cotton cloth, cacao, obsidian blades, feathers. Labor. Tribute was not paid in coins. It was paid in deliveries. Officials did not ask how much something was worth. They asked how much of it had arrived. Storehouses measured abundance physically. Power was counted in rooms filled, not balances tallied. This mattered because the Aztec state did not exist to circulate money. It existed to coordinate people. Labor was the foundation of wealth. Communities owed work, not wages. Men were assigned to build, transport, harvest, or fight. They were fed while they worked. The state provided security and ritual order in return. This was not barter chaos. It was organized obligation. Markets existed, large ones. The market at Tlatelolco stunned observers. Thousands gathered daily. Prices were known. Exchange was orderly. Cocoa beans and cloth functioned as units of account for small transactions. But this was local exchange, not state finance. The empire did not run on markets. It ran on command. Tribute lists specified exact quantities to be delivered at exact times. Failure was punished. Compliance brought protection. The system depended on predictability, on knowing that goods would arrive when required. As long as this held, the empire functioned smoothly. No money was needed because nothing needed to be deferred. Obligations were immediate. Goods moved physically. Labor was scheduled directly. The state did not borrow from the future, consume the present. This made the system stable within limits. Wealth was visible, power was tangible, control was direct. But it also meant that the empire had no abstraction layer. There was no way to smooth shortages across time. There's no way to borrow against future production. There's no way to reprice scarcity instantly. When goods did not arrive, there was nothing to substitute. Everything depended on flow. As the empire expanded, tribute demands grew. More regions were conquered. More goods were required. The system scaled by adding obligations, not by increasing flexibility. For a time, this worked. The empire grew rich not because it had money, but because it had coordination. It knew who owed what, when, and in what form. That knowledge substituted for currency. But coordination without abstraction has limits. Those limits had not yet been reached. For now, the empire was strong, supplied, and confident. A civilization that proved money was not necessary for wealth. Only later would it discover why money exists at all. The Aztec Empire did not collect wealth casually. It scheduled it. Across the empire, tribute obligations were fixed in detail. Specific towns owed specific goods in specific quantities at specific times. Cotton from one region, maize from another. Cacao from the lowlands. Obsidian blades from the volcanic zones. Each item was counted, each delivery recorded. This was administration, not exchange. Tribute arrived in caravans. Porters carried loads along causeways and mountain paths. Goods were unloaded at storehouses built for the purpose. Long rooms stacked with textiles, grain bins sealed against moisture, racks for weapons and tools. Officials inspected deliveries. Scribes marked compliance. Nothing moved unless it was ordered. The state did not ask whether a region could afford its obligations. It asked whether the obligations were met. Failure was not a price signal. It was defiance. As the empire expanded, this system grew heavier. Each conquest added new tribute streams. Each new province brought goods, but also distance. Transport time increased. Storage demands multiplied. Enforcement became more complex. Coordination required constant attention. The system scaled by accumulation. Markets continued to operate at the local level. People exchanged food, tools, cloth, and cacao daily. Prices were understood socially, but markets were peripheral to the state. They supplied households, not the imperial machine. The empire's core needs were met through command. This distinction mattered in moments of stress. When a region experienced poor harvests, tribute did not automatically adjust. There was no price to rise in ration demand, no currency to reallocate scarcity. The burden remained fixed until altered by decree, and decree moved slowly. Goods could not be replaced easily. If maize failed to arrive, cloth could not substitute. If cacao shipments were disrupted, the state could not draw on an abstract reserve of value. Every item was specific. Every shortfall was absolute. Storage did not solve this problem. Storehouses provided buffers only for what had already been delivered. They could not compensate for disruptions elsewhere. When flows slowed, the system tightened everywhere at once. As obligations accumulated, flexibility disappeared. The empire depended increasingly on obedience and continuity. Rebellion disrupted not just politics, but supply. A single, defiant region could interrupt entire chains of provision. Suppression restored control, but at cost. Armies had to be fed while campaigning. That required more tribute from compliant regions. The burden shifted outward. Pressure increased. This created a feedback loop. Expansion demanded more resources. More resources required tighter enforcement. Tighter enforcement provoked resistance. Resistance increased military demand.
Ow!
All of this was managed without money. There were no emergency credits, no ability to borrow food from the future, no way to smooth disruption through debt or prices. Everything remained physical, immediate, and finite. The system held because it had always held. For decades, coordination substituted for abstraction. Labor substituted for wages. Obligation substituted for contracts. The empire functioned because flows remained predictable. But predictability was becoming harder to maintain. Distances lengthened, storage filled faster, schedules tightened, margins vanished. The system did not collapse, but it grew rigid. And rigid systems do not bend well. Nothing had failed yet. But the weight was increasing. And when shocks arrived, whether from climate, rebellion, or something entirely unforeseen, the empire would have no way to absorb them quietly. The structure that made wealth possible also made it fragile. That fragility was not visible in markets. It was visible in storehouses, ledgers, and roads. And it was growing. The Aztec system did not fail because it was inefficient. It failed because it could not bend. For decades, the empire had relied on continuity. Tribute arrived because it always had. Labor was supplied because it was expected. Storehouses filled because flows remained intact. The system assumed repetition. But repetition is fragile. When shocks arrived, they did not announce themselves as collapse. They appeared as delays, missed deliveries. Shortfalls explained as temporary. Officials waited for the next cycle to correct the problem. The next cycle did not always arrive. Droughts reduced harvests in some regions. Tribute demands remained unchanged. Communities were forced to choose between feeding themselves and fulfilling obligations. When deliveries failed, the state interpreted absence as resistance. Punishment followed. Military expeditions restored order, but they did not restore abundance. Armies consumed resources while campaigning. More goods were diverted to supply them. The burden shifted again to compliant regions, tightening pressure everywhere. Coordination absorbed the shock, but only by amplifying it. Because the system lacked abstraction, it had no way to reprice scarcity. There was no mechanism to say, this is rarer now, consume less. Goods were either present or absent. Obligation did not adjust automatically. It required command. Command moved slowly. As the empire expanded, delays multiplied. Distance turned local shortages into imperial problems. Storage smoothed fluctuations only briefly. When disruptions lasted longer than reserves, the system hardened instead of adapting. This rigidity extended to politics. Tribute was not negotiated dynamically. It was imposed. Legitimacy rested on power and ritual, not on exchange. When pressure increased, loyalty weakened. Rebellions became more frequent. Suppression restored order temporarily, but trust eroded. The empire remained strong, but tense. Then came an external shock the system could not process at all. The Spanish did not arrive as traders entering markets. They arrived as a new force that disrupted tribute chains directly. Allies defected, roads were contested, storehouses were seized or destroyed, delivery schedules collapsed. This was not a military defeat at first. It was a logistical one. The Aztec state could not finance prolonged disruption. It could not borrow supplies. It could not shift obligations fluidly. It could not convert surpluses in one form into deficit in another quickly enough. Everything depended on physical flow. When those flows broke, power followed. The empire's wealth had always been visible. Stacks of goods, fed armies, working cities. But visibility was also vulnerability. Once the machinery stopped, there was no hidden reserve of value to draw on. No money waited in the background. The system that had proven money unnecessary now revealed why money exists. Not to create wealth, but to absorb shock. The Aztecs had built an empire on coordination, obligation, and immediacy. The absence of abstraction became fatal. Collapse was not sudden, it was cumulative. Deliveries failed, enforcement strained, loyalty fractured, power thinned, and when the final confrontation came, the state no longer had the logistical depth to sustain itself. The empire did not fall because it lacked gold. It fell because it lacked flexibility. Wealth without money can build cities, it can feed armies, it can command labor. But when disruption arrives, wealth without abstraction has nowhere to go. The Aztec system did not collapse because it was primitive. It collapsed because it had reached the edge of what coordination alone can support.